Howdy, and welcome to the F1 Hatchet, and welcome to my Mexico post-race reaction. What was your thoughts on this GP race? Did you find it exhilarating all the way through, or were you disappointed in it? I personally thought it was a really good race. We had action from the very first lap that caused a red flag, which kind of delayed a little bit things, but then we got the race started again, and then we had a lot of action at the very beginning of that stint. And yes, it died down a little bit, but then we had that sense that we could potentially get some extra action at the end of the race between the Mercedes and potentially when Lando Norris was coming back a little bit faster in the grid, and would he have the chance to actually catch up with Carlos for the win? I mean, it wasn't a direct hope, but it was kind of there in that back of your mind thinking he might be able to do this if things were working out. Were you frustrated with the Max and Lando, contact and or lack of in the sense of pushing people off and then trying to figure out where that line was? We kind of continued this conversation from last week as we had Max getting Lando pushed off and then Lando getting the penalty for not giving that position back. For this week, where we had Max Verstappen getting two 10-second penalties, one for pushing Lando off the track, and then one for actually gaining an advantage and not giving that back as well. Now, I can definitely see the second one. That was very easy. The first one, I mean, it's hard for me to gauge. I haven't really compared them between this week and last week. I kind of lean towards the Stewarts this week more than, as the same as last week. It was, I think Lando was just behind, but I think Max was, pushing the edge on the rule set, and I think he kind of overshot the rules this week. So we'll have to figure out where he can balance things out in the coming races. So this week actually gave Lando the, bonus points for, shrinking that, lead down that Max has. But is it enough? It's hard to tell. I mean, there's only, 4 races left. So he has to really gain a lot of ground in those 4 races. So we have to really see if something happens to Max again, or will he just be able to come back and, win another race and just seal up his championship? But overall, I thought it was a really good race. I enjoyed it. I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10. We had a little bit of action that was probably shouldn't have caused some controversy, which kind of bumps it down. But overall, I thought it was an excellent race. Had a lot of overtaking on track, and it was really good. But what was your thoughts? Like normal, I go from the back of the pack and work my way through, kind of telling you what I know of each driver and what I have my feelings of how they drove were. So, without further ado, we will see here Yuki Tsunoda, who qualified in 11th spot and ended out in 20th after that DNF. I think he was trying to prove himself too much, is my general opinion. I think pressure's on with Liam Lawson coming back in that spot, and then the talk about potentially Liam Lawson actually going to the Red Bull when Yuki's been at that RB seat for quite a while. So yeah, I'm sure he thinks that he deserves that shot as well. And so when Liam Lawson's coming in, I think he was trying to prove himself too much. And yes, it was a gap, but I think it was too tight of a gap, too much of a risk for that gap that Yuki went down. And it wasn't really Yuki's fault, but he got caught up in it, as well as Alex Albon, because they were going into that 3 wide with, I think it was Pierre Gasly, or was it, Pierre Gasly and Albon and Yuki kind of getting pushed in that 3. So there was 3 going into 1, and Alex Albon didn't have any place to go and kind of got hit with Yuki, and Yuki spun around and just collided with the wall after he totally went backwards, basically. It was kind of interesting view of that replay of him going backwards in the air, going down that side of that track. It was kind of interesting to see. Luckily, no one was hurt, so in that regard. But I think overall, you could probably blame Yuki, even though there was a true gap there, that he probably shouldn't have been taking that much of a risk on that first stint, that first lap, try to get into that first corner. And it, kind of caused some more chaos because as he said in the interview later, it always happens on this track that he's getting hit out, which he probably should take back and try to be a little bit more cautious through that first stint to see if he can, get some more positions on merit going around the track instead of trying to outdo them on that first lap. But overall, I don't think it was Yuki's fault. I think it was just kind of him just pushing his luck too much, and it's probably due to him getting pressure from Liam Lawson and all of the turmoil in that red RB seat and potentially the Red Bull seat for that position. And then we come to Alex Albon, which, as I kind of already explained, he qualified in 9th, so he did fairly well, and I think he's fairly disappointed in that stint because he was knocked out very fast right in the run. He was squeezed. He had nowhere to go. He had nothing that he could do and just kind of caught out and got hit and knocking out that Williams in that first run to that first corner, and just kind of just collected him in that mess where it damaged his car where he couldn't proceed as well, kind of getting it out there on that run, which caused that big safety car setup. So we had 2 cars out within the first stint corner section of that, the lap on that first run, caused a long safety car to get all that mess cleaned up. And so then we come to Fernando Alonso, who qualified in 13th, was a fairly good run. His 400th run. That's an amazing number of races that Fernando Alonso has started in. And he could be in for a little while longer too. I mean, if he's in for another 2 or 3 seasons, that'll climb quite a bit. So excellent job for him. I know he's a little bit sick this weekend coming into this weekend, and that probably threw him off a little bit on the qualifying and everything, but he did a fairly good job getting into 13th in my view. Kind of just dropped back in that first run, got and kind of ran around a little bit, gained a position, but not went around for like 16 laps before he had to retire the car, and it was no fault of his own. Basically what I've heard was that there was brake issues on that Aston Martin, which made him retire. So he didn't actually get to even complete that 400th start that he did for Mexico. And overall, it was kind of a disappointing weekend for Fernando, hoping that he could get farther up into the points. And I think they were thinking that as well, starting the 13th, just getting outside of that point range to be able to push themselves into those bottom points and kind of solidify where they are in the constructor standing. So kind of a bad weekend for Aston Martin in general, but a really bad weekend for Fernando Alonso. Perez had a horrible weekend altogether, all around, I think. He qualified in 18th after he struggled in qualifying and didn't quite make it out of Q1, which is the first time in a while that he's done that. Of course, it has to be at his home race in Mexico for that. Made it up a decent amount, but then, of course, he had that 5-second penalty for lining up on the grid, but past his pit box, so they counted it as a false start or a jump start. So he got a 5-second penalty there, and then he was kind of gotten into the banging around with Liam Lawson a little bit, putting some damage on his side pod and some of the flooring over there. Made him kind of come in for an earlier pit stop than I think they wanted him to on lap 21, switching from that hard set to a medium set, and then going till lap 45 before they switched to another set of mediums. And then they went on like lap 70, they tried to go for the fastest lap on a set of softs. He had a really good start, as I said. He did a good start. Unfortunately, it was just started from the outside of his pit box, but gained 5 positions on the start of the race. So that was really good for that part of it. It was just the 5-second penalty and then kind of getting caught in the middle of some of the other action that's happening on track that just kind of kept him pushing back and back and back. And so he ended up being outside the points, outside of the ability to go do anything. I have him passing Stroll for 11th on lap 12, and then passing Juan Yuzo for 16th on lap 47. So that kind of gives you an idea of where he was in that mix after those pit stops, kind of like dropping back in that, but still somewhat there. But then they decided just to pull the plug and try to go for that fastest lap, which they didn't even get on that run. So horrible weekend for Sergio Perez. I feel sorry for him because, all that speculation is just getting more and more and more on top of him in that Red Bull. And the fact that, you had Max Verstappen, get a 20-second penalty pit and still come out ahead of his teammate Sergio Perez after all of that is just really downheartening in that regard of where Perez should be in this mix, and he's just not there. And so that's going to be probably moved over to probably a different team or be let go in my guess by the end of the season, calmness where everything's, has a little bit more time to get calmed out without too many big breaking stories on that regard. So I'm afraid that Sergio is on his way out, and this just puts that much more pressure on him to prove himself in the last, 4 races to show that he really needs to be in that Red Bull. So we'll see if he can actually stand up for that pressure or not. Then we come to Liam Lawson, who didn't have the greatest weekend. He started off in 12th and ended up in 16th. He did gain 2 spots in that first lap. And then I have him actually passing Perez for 16th on lap 42 and passed Ocon for 13th on lap 49. He did have contact with Franco at one point, as well as Perez in all of this mess. And so, I think some of that was just kind of put a little bit more strain on that RB, getting him more tires and to that effect, so he didn't get the most out of that RB as that he was hoping for. He did go a fairly long stint to like lap 40 on a set of hards before switching to a set of mediums. Then he switched to a set of softs at the very end. It's lap 67, I believe it was. He switched from mediums to a set of softs to see if he could gain any extra ground, but was not able to. Yeah, Juan Zhou, who kind of had a quiet weekend, even though he's kind of in the mix, qualified in 19th. Actually, he qualified in 20th, got bumped up to 19th because Ocon took some PowerPoint parts and started from the pit lane. So he actually started up one spot in 19th, worked his way up to 15th. Kind of quiet race for him. Decent race for him in that stake, not quite where he needed to be with his teammate, but a kind of a quiet race for him. Went to lap 45 on a set of hards before switching to a set of mediums. Valtteri qualified in 15th and went to 14th, just to up a position. He stayed out a whole 57 laps on a set of hards before switching to a set of mediums. So he went really long, hoping for an incident later in that race that didn't really happen. And so he was hoping that he could get that extra pit stop to kind of get him bumped up into that realm. But a decent run. I know it's not as good as run as he's seen in the past. Here, it's probably the worst he's done in the Mexico race. But overall, I think he did a really good job in that just down-stricken stake F1 car. So I think they really have a lot of work to do. Basically, I think they've pretty much given it up for this year and probably are trying to get Audi to help them out for next year to figure out where they can come. I do have him passing Oscar Piastri for 11th on lap 15. So that was good. But overall, just kind of dropping back in the pack after that long stint. So that kind of gets that mix in there. And then we have Esteban Ocon, who, as I said, started from the pit row after changing some power parts, as he had qualified 19th overall, and so changing some unit parts didn't really affect him that much. Starting from the pit lane in 20th position. He started off on a set of hards and went to lap 49, again in a long stint, trying to hope for that there was something that would happen a little bit later in the race. He did gain 2 positions at the start of the race, so he kind of gained a little bit of ground at the very beginning, and then just kind of was able to battle his way out in the backfield, worked his way up to, that 13th spot. So a decent showing, but not where he really wanted it to be overall. I have him passing Perez on lap 42 for 16th position, and then he passed. Sorry, I got that wrong. He passed Wan Zhou on lap 29 for 13th position, as well as Bottas on lap 71 for that 13th position as well. So a decent run for him, starting from the pits, but not the greatest run, not get to the point range in that regard. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Franco had a fun race. He qualified in 16th. I know he was disappointed with that qualification, and then he made it up to 12th overall. He went 48 laps on a set of hards before switching to a set of mediums. I have him passing Lawson on lap 16 for 12th, then had contact with Lawson at that point in time. And he also got a 10-second penalty for a collision with Lawson later in the race that basically didn't affect him at all. He basically stayed in that same position. So that penalty really didn't affect him overall, but just doing all of that, battling out, I think it just wasn't quite where he needed to be. Kind of worn his tires out a little bit too much in that dirty air, trying to get past people, trying to go side by side in that back of the field. I know he was kind of struggling around a little bit, but he was doing better. And then, of course, they were hoping to be closer up into the points. I know at least Alex was in that run for that Williams. So I think they were both kind of disappointed overall for the Williams team, not quite getting to the point range where they were hoping to be. Lance Stroll qualified in 14th and ended up in 11th. He gained 3 positions at the start of the race, but seemed to have dropped back and then had to gain a ground later in the race, from what I could tell. He did, pit fairly early on lap 27 from a set of mediums to a set of hards. I have him passing Perez on lap 41 for 15th position, passing Wan Zhou on lap 43 for 14th, passing Ocon on lap 49 for that 12th position overall. And then he kind of gained the ground because some other pit stop strategies in that regard. So Lance probably could have done a little bit better. I know it's hard to say, but I think, in that Aston Martin, trying to figure out where it really fits in. But I think it fits in, it should be up in that top tier area. It's just not quite at that mark. And so I think they're kind of struggling. And I know they've been bringing some updates to that car, and they were hoping that would help out a little bit more than it did in the last couple of races. So they'll have to figure out what kind of mechanism they have in there. So I think Lance should have done better, but he did just get outside of points. So I know that we're hoping to get into the point range to kind of solidify some of that area as well, to kind of show that last momentum for the Aston Martins. So that gets us through the bottom 10. So we have the top 10 with Pierre Gasly having a decent run, qualified in 8th, made it to 10th, so gained a point for Alpine, which is always good. I basically have him, losing a position at the very start of the race, but at the end, gaining that back with a +1. So a decent run for him. He did pass Bottas on lap 43 for that 10th position. He was having that contact between Alex and Yuki in that running, so they kind of got squeezed and got pushed. So he's kind of involved at that very beginning, so I'm not sure how much damage was caused, if any, during that very first stint. So he may have been able to make it a little bit farther up in the grid, but it really wasn't talked about, so I can't say that there was that much damage, if there was damage at all. So I know he was kind of disappointed on only getting 10th, but it's still a point. Still, looking forward to that Alpine moving forward next year. So kind of getting all this data together for this year, trying to help them push forward next year, I think is what his perspective is at this point in time. So gaining a point is good. not quite where they want to be. Still potentially could move up in the constructor standings, but unlikely at this point. So a decent run, just not quite the exhilarant Pierre Gasly like we want to see. That's really enjoying it, really having a thrill ride, going back and battling all those people around him. Nico Hülkenberg did a great job. Probably not as good as he wanted, but he qualified in 10th. And then ended up in 9th. I know he was struggling a little bit with some issues on that car that they were having to work out through that steering wheel. But overall, I think he did a really good job. He gained 2 positions in the start of the race. Went to lap 30-ish before switching to a set of hards from a set of mediums. He did pass Ocon on lap 34 for 12th. On lap 37, he passed Bottas for 11th and passed Franco on lap 43 for 8th, and ended up in 9th overall, gaining that 2 points for Haas, gaining another 2 points for himself in that driver's standing, which is always good to see. Another really good run for Haas. They seem to have come back really strong at this back half of the season, really putting forward, getting up into those top 10 shootouts on the qualifying, and during the race getting up there into the decent point range. So I hope that keeps on going. Pretty happy with Haas in this run. And so hopefully they can continue that for the next 4 races and just kind of keep pushing forward, putting that pressure on those people in this run. So I think Hülkenberg did a pretty good job. I know he's behind his teammate, so he's not going to be happy with that. And he was kind of dropping back behind Oscar as well, which puts a little bit more sting in that, since his teammate was able to stay ahead of Oscar in that last run. But I think he did really good, probably defending a little bit more on Oscar to try to keep Oscar from getting a chance to make a good run on Kevin as well. So I'm sure he played his defensive teammate role in that regard. So I think he did a really good job in this Mexico race. Oscar was one of the big shockers in qualifying, of course, didn't make it out of Q1, kind of like Perez. Ended up starting the race in 17th, but unlike Perez, he made it all the way up to 8th into the point range. Kind of stayed out of trouble for the most part, but had a lot of action in regard. Basically, he went to lap 40 on a set of mediums before switching to a set of hards in that run. So I have him passing Bottas on lap 13 for 15th, passing Franco on lap 22 for 12th, passing Stroll on lap 25 for 11th, passing Lawson on lap 35 for 5th, passing Ocon on lap 42 for 12th, passing Bottas again on lap 44 for 11th, passing Gasly on lap 45 for 10th, and passing Oscar on lap 57 for that 8th position. So he had a lot of action on track in that regard from what I saw. Really good job from him coming back. I know he would have hoped to have been up at the very start because of qualifying. He needs to get his qualifying down. It keeps getting those times dropped, going outside the track boundaries, putting pressure on himself in those qualifying sessions. So he needs to work out that a little bit so he keeps up in the front, so he can be competitive and help his teammate out a little bit more in these last few races. But overall, I think Oscar did a really good job, except for the qualifying, where he ended up a little bit behind where he should be. But it was kind of exciting for us as fans as we get to see him coming back through the field, passing these cars on track. Kevin, I think, did an awesome job. Qualified in 7th, really good qualifying for him, and ended up in 7th as well, gaining some valuable points for Haas. So overall, I think Haas is doing well, like I said, and I think Kevin really did well. And he was ahead of his teammate, which you usually don't see. You usually see Hülkenberg ahead of Kelvin in these races. So it was really good to see Kevin back out there on his last few races for his probably F1 career, doing some really good and having some good fun in those races. And I know he really enjoyed it from what I heard on the radio, thinking it was really good fun. being out there, really pushing forward, having that car, be where he wanted it to and handle how it wanted it to in generally. So doing a good job there. He went to lap 31 on a set of mediums before switching to a set of hards. And basically he passed Bottas on lap 36 for 10th and passed Franco on lap 40 for 7th. So overall, doing good. Didn't quite have as much action, I guess, but was able to maintain the pace. And at one point, he was actually, gaining ground on Max after Max had done that long pit stop because of the penalties that he had, and was working his way back up. He had that gap in front of Kevin, and I saw that shrinking a little bit, and I was like, wow, is Kevin even going to be putting some pressure on Max, which would have been kind of interesting to see, but that never did really happen. So to my unfortunate chagrin, as I would have loved to see Kevin come back and really put pressure on Max and see how that battle would have played out in that running. George qualified in 5th, ended up in 5th, or I should say Max, I guess I skipped Max, sorry. Qualified in 2nd, ended up in 6th. So he was doing a really good job in general. He had a good start, took 1st, then got kind of pushed wide and had to retake 2nd on lap 10. And then we had some of those battles going on. Then he had to do his pit stop because his tires were really worn out, according to him, on lap 27 from that set of mediums that he started the race on. Switched to a set of hards. Of course, had the 2 10-second penalties, so that really played into his whole race. That dropped him back into the front pack or the top of the mid pack, however you want to look at that. And then he had to kind of work his way back up through those rankings to see as far as he could get. So he passed Ocon on lap 30 for 11th, passed Bottas on lap 32 for 10th, passed Franco on lap 36 for 8th. In all of that running, so he kind of ended up getting to that spot and then basically kind of maintaining that run. So for Max, I think he went over the board on the boundaries, really pushed it a little too hard on those rule sets and got penalized heavily for it, but he probably deserved some of that to really put a stamp on, this is not how we want to do racing, I think is the big thing there, more than setting the rules. But, we want to see close racing, and so we don't want to, penalize drivers too much in that regard of driving. So we just want to make sure it's clean and enjoyable for the fans, so we're not just going outside the track limits every time we want to pass or push someone out of the track limits to pass. So I think in that regard, as I said, that they're probably both deserved. I'm not sure if the 10-second penalty was deserved for the first incident. It should have been more of a 5-second penalty. But yeah, that second where he just didn't really brake at all and just kind of went, straight off. I think he deserved that 10-second penalty for leaving the track and gaining that advantage. So I'd have to go back and look at the first incident again to see how blatant that was. But overall, besides those issues, Max did a really good job coming back through the field, gaining some ground. As I said, he had all those penalties and was still ahead of his teammate when he came back on. So from that pit stop, and Perez had already had a pit stop, so they were on equal ground. So in that regard, I think he did a really good job. Worked his way back up to 6, decent points, but not where he wanted to be. He wanted to be closer to Lando, minimize that damage. But that's partly due to him, I think, in that regard. I think he got frustrated early on and then caused some more headaches for himself. George did a decent job. We're not expecting as much in those Mercedes as we probably want to. They're coming back, but not coming back quite as fast as we would like to be really contenders for some of these races. But he did a good job getting in 5th for qualifying and ended up 5th overall in the race. He had a little bit longer stint on his tires, went to lap 32 on that set of mediums before switching to a set of hards. He did pass Hulkenberg on lap 15 for fifth. Is that right? And then he passed Lawson on lap 37 for fourth. So overall, I think he was doing well. He was doing a fairly good job in that running. And I think that battle between him and Lewis, having that clean racing, not pushing people out, not doing the dive bombs into that effect, was really fun to see. And Lewis got the advantage of that and was able to take fourth out of that run. And so that brings us to Lewis Hamilton, who gained a position on the start of the race, started off in sixth, ended up in fourth. So that was a good run for him. I know he's complained about that Mercedes kind of switching how it feels almost on a stint by stint basis. So they have some trying to figure out how to stabilize that car to get the most out of what the Mercedes is doing in any kind of condition so they can plan for it. But he had a pretty fun race overall, I think. So he gained fifth position on lap 11, passed Franco on lap 32 for seventh, passed Lawson on lap 34 for sixth, passed Oscar on lap 35 for fifth, and then passed George on lap 66 for fourth. So he kind of made it in there and had some good action, some good fun, worked his way up to fourth. Didn't really have a chance to gain ground on Charles Leclerc, but it was that back of that, in front of that backpack on that front run, if that makes any sense. He had that nice gap from the first three to the rest of the field that they need to figure out how to gain some ground on, but overall I think they had some fun over that. So I think he did a decent job in that Mercedes due to where that Mercedes was, and of course they were ahead of Max, who potentially could have come through the field as well. So that gives us to Charles Leclerc, who qualified in fourth and ended up in third. He did gain the fastest lap as well, so he gained that extra point to his standing, so that helps him out as well. Basically, I have him passing Max on lap 10 for second, and then basically in that running for a long time before Lando was able to come back and overtake him in that second half of the race. And then basically he pitted again for that pit stop on lap 70 for a set of softs so that he could go for that fastest lap and take that point away from either the Red Bulls or the McLarens trying to gain that ground up on that constructor's standing. So really good job for him. I know he held back as much as he could. I know Carlos was not liking the push, and so there's some of the team orders to help him out as well. So I think that cost him probably that that second position overall. But I think it was a good run and a good effort from Charles Leclerc, and he still got on the podium, which is always good to see. Lando Norris qualified in third, ended up in second. I think he was really frustrated at the very beginning after the back and forth with Max at the start of the race, getting pushed off, getting some, getting hammered in that regard of I have nowhere to go, basically having to give some of those positions up, kind of cutting those corners. And because of that, and some of those tight battles at the very beginning, I think he kind of wore out his tires a little bit faster than he wanted to. So he went to lap 31 on that set of mediums where he basically, Max had already pitted, but he was hoping to gain a little bit more ground on the Ferraris before switching over to that set of hards, but had to, pit a little earlier than I think he wanted to. But I have him, coming back and gaining that second position from Charles Leclerc on lap 63. And that was a fun little battle itself in the regard. So I think Lando did a good job of, playing the, championship, battle. I think he thinks, and I probably, it may be hard to see one way or the other, but if that battle with Max didn't play out quite the way it was, and he was able to get around Max. Would he have been able to put pressure on his friend Carlos for that win? I think there was some potential there because he wouldn't have killed his tires in that first stint, kind of running behind Max in that dirty air, trying to figure out how to do, and Max was backing him up a little bit farther in that run as well. So I think there was some confusion because of that. Issues that he's had with Max and trying to get by Max earlier on that kind of kept him behind Max for longer than he should have been. Especially when Max was starting to drop off a little bit from the Ferraris, and that kind of helped keep Lando away from potentially gaining that first position. But in the end, it was still a fairly good gap, so it's really hard to say after the fact if he had gotten to that point or not. So there's still some potential there, but he handled it more like a champion, trying to maximize his points after that fact, not really trying to get into putting too much, emphasis on some of these passes and taking himself out, where it would have just ended the championship run for him at all. So I think his viewpoint is good. He just needs to help, get some of the little bit executions a little bit better and kind of be able to play out. But he's still in the running as of this week, so that's good to see. And I like to see that championship battle, even if it's probably not going to happen, but there's that chance that something else will happen to Max and give that Lando that point gain that he really is looking for to really put the pressure on Max for those last few races. So we'll have to see if that happens or not, but I do like the way Lando's been driving lately and has really been taking off and putting the fastest laps near the end of the race on used tires, so that McLaren's really hitting up on all cylinders in that regard, in my viewpoint. That comes to Carlos Sainz, who ended up getting pole position, losing that first position due to Max. I was able to retake that position on lap 9 through an on-pass action that I think Max was not expecting at all, and I think that's why Carlos was able to get by him so easily in that running. I don't think, because he came from a long ways back and was able to really pull in and keep it, not go outside the track boundaries, not push Max out. It was just a beautiful overtake in my view, and was able to maintain that lead mainly because I think of his teammate as well, keeping that gap clear. And so I think Carlos did everything he did. He deserves driver of the day. If it wasn't going to be Carlos, I'd probably give it to Kevin Magnussen in that Haas. Is that really doing probably one of his better runs in his career in that Haas. So I'd probably give that to him. But definitely Carlos deserves the driver of the day in my view as well. So doing an excellent job. Went to lap 33 on a set of mediums before switching to a set of hards, maintained the lead from that point on. If I say the race, and I kind of messed up this because of all the action after the restart from the safety car, I didn't catch the time gaps at lap 10, so I had to switch my scheme around a little bit. So at lap 5, underneath the safety car, there was like a 1.2 second gap with Max in the lead. By lap 15, there was a 1.8 second gap with Sainz in the lead, and that moved up to 4.8 at lap 25. At lap 35, it was 8.1 over his teammate. At lap 50, it dropped down to 6.3. And by the end of the race, it was only a 4.7 second lead over Lando. So it was a fairly clean race for Carlos, fairly straightforward. After he got into that front running, really good to see, and I really enjoyed this whole race. What was your viewpoint? Did I miss anything? I'd appreciate any of that in the comments. It was a hard race to keep track of, and all of the things that were going on in these big areas at the start of the race, and then closer to the end of that race, you started getting some more action as well. So what did that do to the driver standing? So Max has 362 points with Lando now at 315. So he gained that gap, shrunken that gap up on Max, but he still has a ways to go before really putting pressure on Max for that first position. And then we go back to the back of the field where Kevin was able to jump over Alex Albon on Daniel Ricciardo to that 13th position with 14 points now over Alex's 12 and Daniel's 12. So that kind of helped him out in the overall driver standings in this regard. And kind of good to see, as he's coming back in the last, season of his F1 career, probably. But who knows? He's already came back once from being retired, being out of the F1, so you never know. But it's good to see that he's experiencing some of these good vibes at the end of this, stint of his F1 career. So, constructor standings. We still have McLaren in the lead with 566 points now. But we have Ferrari jumping up to that second position with 537 points. So now it's a battle, potentially between Ferrari and McLaren, as Red Bull seems to be dropping back in that pack a little bit, but there's still some hope that Red Bull will gain some more and claw their way back up to that front. So you still have to, can't count them out for anything. But now Red Bull is now in that third position with 512. So Ferrari is potentially, and rightfully so, looking to see if they can't take over the constructor standings this season. So we'll have to watch out for them. If it's anything like the last two races, it will be exciting to see. And then, of course, we have Haas in that sixth position, really gaining, solidifying that over RB with a 10-point, lead over RB. So there's still some hope for RB, but it's, diminishing. And then Williams is kind of like stuck in that eighth position with Alpine potentially gaining ground on them for that eighth position overall as well. So that kind of concludes what happened in the Mexico. What's coming up? We have Brazil, and we have the sprint race on November 2nd. So this is a sprint race weekend, so be aware of that. It was first introduced in 1973. Valtteri Bottas in 2018 had the fastest lap with 1 minute 10.54 seconds. It has going to be, for the main GP race, it's going to have 71 laps being run on it. And the length of that lap is 2.677 miles for a total race distance of 190.064 miles. Now, it is a sprint race, so we'll have a more shortened version of that on November 2nd, and then have the full GP on the 3rd. If you would like to hear my reaction to that and see what happens, please subscribe or stay tuned to this channel, and please like this video if you've made it this far. I'd appreciate it, and till then, farewell.